7 years. That's 2,555 nights lying next to a woman who treated him like a polite stranger. Leo didn't flinch when bullets tore through his cars, and he didn't blink when rival families threatened his life. He was a man made of iron violence and cold calculation. But his wife's silence, it was killing him one day at a time. He waited 7 years to hear 3 words. What she gave him instead destroyed him entirely. The espresso machine hissed a sharp, mechanical burst of steam that briefly broke the suffocating quiet of the kitchen. Leo stood near the marble island, watching the dark liquid drip into the porcelain cup. He didn't drink espresso because he liked the taste. He drank it because it was a sharp, bitter shock to the system. It kept him awake. It kept him sharp. And looking across the cavernous space of their Chicago penthouse at his wife, he needed to be sharp. Nora sat at the far end of the sprawling dining table. She was reading the morning paper, not scrolling on a phone, but physically turning the broadsheet pages of the Tribune. The rustle of the paper was the only other sound in the room. She wore a silk robe, slate grey, perfectly tied. Her dark hair was pinned up, held by a simple tortoiseshell clip. She looked like a painting, cold, beautiful, entirely inaccessible. Today was their anniversary. 7 years. Leo picked up his cup and walked toward the table. The soles of his leather shoes made no sound on the imported Italian tile. He moved with the quiet grace of a man who had spent his youth surviving alleyways and shipping containers long before he owned the ports they sat in. He pulled out a chair opposite her and sat. Nora didn't look up. Her eyes tracked down the column of text. "Good morning, Leo." Her voice was smooth even, and entirely devoid of inflection. It was the same tone she used to speak to the doorman, the dry cleaner, and the men he paid to kill people. "Morning," he said. His voice was a low rumble worn down by years of breathing in cigar smoke and dockyard smog. He set a small flat velvet box on the table. He didn't slide it toward her. He just placed it carefully near her saucer. For 3 seconds, Nora ignored it. Then deliberately, she folded the newspaper. She set it aside, adjusted her posture, and looked at the box. She didn't look at him yet. Just the box. "You didn't have to," she said. "It's 7 years, Nora. I am aware of the date." Finally, she lifted her eyes. They were a striking pale green, like sea glass, and just as hard. There was no hatred in them. Leo often thought it would be easier if she hated him. Hatred was a fire. Hatred meant there was something to burn. You could fight hatred. You could argue with it, scream at it, break it down. Nora didn't hate him. She merely endured him. She had weaponized her compliance. She reached out with slender, pale fingers and flipped the lid of the box open. Inside sat a key, heavy and antique, resting on the black velvet. Beside it was a folded piece of heavy stock paper. Nora frowned slightly. It was the first genuine crack in her porcelain mask all morning. She unfolded the paper. It was a deed. The house in Kenilworth. Leo set his chest tight. He kept his hands flat on the table to stop them from fidgeting. Bosses didn't fidget. Men who commanded 600 armed soldiers didn't nervously await their wife's approval. "Your mother's house? I bought it back from the bank. It's in your name, completely clean. No ties to my businesses, no shell corporations. It's yours." It had taken him 6 months to track down the current owners, overpay them by $2 million to vacate immediately and secure the title. He remembered the stories she used to tell during their brief, stilted dinners in the first year of their marriage. Stories of the garden out back, the oak tree, the way the light hit the sunroom. Nora stared at the deed. She stared at the signature line where her maiden name, Nora Hayes, was printed beneath the property lines. Silence stretched. The refrigerator hummed. Down on the street, 40 stories below, the faint wail of a siren bled through the reinforced bulletproof glass. Leo waited for a smile, a tear, a crack in the ice. Just one slip of genuine emotion, one moment where she looked at him, not as her captor, but as her husband. Nora carefully folded the paper along its original crease. She placed it back in the box, closed the lid, and pulled it a few inches closer to her coffee cup. "Thank you, Leo," she said softly. "It is a very generous gift. I appreciate it." It was a dismissal. It was a corporate acknowledgement of a bonus. Leo felt a familiar, jagged stone lodge itself in his throat. He swallowed it down. He nodded slowly, picking up his espresso. He knocked it back in one burning gulp. "You're welcome," he said. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "We have dinner at Dominic's tonight. 8 o'clock. Vincent will have the car ready by 7:30. "I will be ready," she said, already reaching for the newspaper again. Leo turned and walked out of the kitchen. He didn't look back. If he did, he knew he would just see the back of the newspaper. In the foyer, his bodyguard, Vincent, was waiting. Vincent was built like a cinder block, a man with a broken nose and eyes that never stopped moving. He held Leo's overcoat. "Everything good, boss?" Vincent asked quietly, noting the tight white lines around Leo's mouth. "Fine," Leo rasped, shoving his arms into the sleeves of the coat. "Call the port manager. Tell him if the shipment from Montreal isn't cleared by noon, I'm coming down there myself to break his fingers." Vincent nodded, stepping back to open the heavy front door. "Understood. Happy anniversary, by the way." Leo stepped out into the hallway, the chill of the air conditioning hitting his face. "Yeah," he muttered. A real celebration. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off his view of the penthouse door, Leo closed his eyes. 7 years. He owned the police chief, he owned the judges, and he owned the waterfront. But he couldn't buy his way out of the purgatory he had built for himself the day he took Nora Hayes as payment for a debt. The drive to Uncle Dominic's estate in Oak Brook was a masterclass in suffocating proximity. The back of the armored Maybach was spacious, smelling of rich leather, and the faint, expensive scent of Nora's perfume bergamot and cedar. It was a scent Leo could identify in a crowded room, blindfolded. They sat on opposite sides of the wide seat. The armrest was down, a physical barrier between them. Nora watched the rain streak across the tinted window, the streetlights of the city blurring into long ribbons of gold and red. She wore a stunning, backless black evening gown. It clung to her perfectly, an armor of silk and thread. Leo watched her reflection in the glass. He wondered not for the first time what was going on in her head. "Dominic is going to push about the union contracts tonight," Leo said, breaking the silence. He needed to hear her voice. "He's getting paranoid in his old age, thinks I'm giving too much away to the Irish." Nora didn't turn her head. "And are you?" "No, I'm keeping them satisfied so they don't blow up our trucks. It's called logistics. Dominic only understands brute force. He understands what kept him alive this long," Nora replied evenly. Finally, she turned to look at him. "Do you need me to steer his wife away after dinner?" "Please. Maria will talk his ear off about the country club if you give her the opening. It'll keep Dominic from dragging me into his study too early." Consider it done. They operated like this. A perfectly synchronized machine. Nora knew exactly how to play the role of the devoted, powerful Mafia wife. She knew the politics, the feuds, the delicate egos of the men who worked for him. She was an asset. She was brilliant, and she hated every second of it. Leo looked down at his hands. "You didn't have to wear the necklace." Nora touched the heavy string of diamonds resting against her collarbone. Another anniversary gift from their 3rd year. "It is expected," she said simply. "Dominic values displays of prosperity. If I come unadorned, he will assume your businesses are suffering. We cannot have him thinking you are weak." "We." She said we, but she meant you. Leo closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the headrest. The memory of their wedding day flashed in his mind, unbidden and sharp. It hadn't been a celebration. It had been a transaction in a cold, echoing basilica downtown. Arthur Hayes Nora's father had been a pathetic sight, a man who had inherited a massive legitimate shipping company and gambled it all away at underground tables owned by the Rossi family. The debt was staggering. $9 million. Dominic had wanted to gut Arthur, chop him into pieces, and send him to his competitors in a meat crate. Leo had intervened. He had seen Nora once a year prior at a charity gala her father had hosted before the money ran out. She had been fiery laughing with friends, her eyes bright with a future she thought was secure. Leo, standing in the shadows of the ballroom, a man whose hands were already stained with blood, had felt a sudden violent pull toward her light. When Arthur was on his knees, weeping and offering anything to save his skin, Leo made the counteroffer. "The debt is forgiven. The shipping company becomes a subsidiary of Rossi Logistics, and I take your daughter." He remembered the look on Nora's face when he went to her family home to explain the terms. He expected her to scream, to slap him, to run. Instead, she had just stared at him. She looked at her father sobbing in the corner of the study, and then back at Leo. The light he had seen in her eyes at the gala was extinguished instantly, replaced by a cold, hardened glass. "If I say yes, he lives?" she had asked. "He lives. He walks away, clear." "Fine. I'll pack a bag. No tears. No begging." She had walked down the aisle of the basilica 3 weeks later, in a dress that looked more like a shroud, said, "I do," with a voice devoid of a soul, and signed her life away to a monster. Leo had been stupid enough to think he could change it. He thought that by being gentle with her, by never forcing himself on her, by giving her the world on a silver platter, she would eventually see that he wasn't like his uncle. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to give her the life her father had thrown away. But a cage is a cage, even if the bars are made of gold. "We're here." Vincent's voice crackled over the intercom, pulling Leo back to the present. The car pulled up to a massive wrought-iron gate that slowly swung open, revealing a sprawling stone mansion. Before the car even fully stopped at the portico, Nora's posture changed. The slight slump of exhaustion vanished. Her shoulders went back. The coldness in her eyes melted into a warm, practiced, and entirely fake brightness. Leo watched the transformation with a sickening mix of awe and despair. When Vincent opened the door, Leo stepped out into the light drizzle. He offered his hand to Nora. She took it, her skin cool against his. As she stepped out, she slipped her arm through his, leaning into his side, just enough to project intimacy. "Ready?" Leo muttered, feeling the phantom burn of her touch through his jacket. Nora smiled, looking up at him with eyes that didn't reach her soul. "Of course, darling. Let's go feed the wolves." The dinner was exactly as agonizing as Leo anticipated. The dining room was loud, smelling of roasted lamb, heavy red wine, and the sharp tang of cheap cologne. Uncle Dominic sat at the head of the table, a bulldog of a man with a thick neck and suspicious eyes. "Leo." Dominic boomed, wiping grease from his chin with a linen napkin. "The docks. I hear the Irish are pushing for a bigger cut of the transit fees. Why haven't you cracked skulls?" The table fell silent. Cousins and capos stopped chewing, their eyes darting between Dominic and Leo. Before Leo could answer, Nora laughed. It was a beautiful light sound that cut through the tension perfectly. "Oh, Dominic," Nora said, swirling her wine glass. You know Leo. He prefers to let them think they're winning before he changes the locks on the shipping containers. Why break a skull when you can just break their bank accounts? It's much quieter. Dominic paused, staring at Nora. Then he let out a barking laugh. She's sharp, this one. You got lucky, Leo. A smart wife is better than a loaded gun. I know, Leo said softly, looking at Nora. She beamed back at him, playing the devoted wife to absolute perfection. It was a flawless performance, and it made Leo want to tear the room apart. They left the estate just past midnight. The rain had picked up, turning into a steady driving downpour that turned the highway into a slick black mirror. Nora had immediately dropped the act the second the Maybach's doors sealed them in. The smile vanished, the posture relaxed, and she retreated to her side of the armrest, staring out at the dark again. The silence returned heavy and absolute. Leo undid the top button of his shirt, exhaustion pulling at his bones. He reached into the compartment between them and poured a heavy measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler. He didn't offer her any. He knew she wouldn't take it. You handled Dominic well, Leo said, staring at the amber liquid. He's a simple man, Nora replied quietly. He just wants to be assured that you are still capable of cruelty. I merely reminded him that you are. Leo flinched. The words were delivered without malice, which somehow made them cut deeper. You are capable of cruelty. That was all she saw. All she would ever see. Nora. Leo started, his voice cracking slightly. He didn't know what he was going to say. Maybe he was going to beg. Maybe he was going to ask her, for the 1000th time, what he could do to bridge the ocean between them. He never got the chance. The first indication that something was wrong was Vincent slamming on the brakes, the massive Maybach, fish-tailed tires shrieking against the wet asphalt. Leo was thrown forward against the seatbelt, his scotch flying across the cabin and splashing against the partition. "Vincent!" Leo roared. "Ambush, hold on!" Vincent yelled back over the intercom. Through the front windshield, Leo saw it. A heavy commercial dump truck had pulled horizontally across the off-ramp they were taking, completely blocking the path. Before Vincent could throw the car into reverse, a pair of black SUVs boxed them in from behind. "Get down!" Leo shouted, his instincts, honed from decades of violence, taking over instantly. He unbuckled his seatbelt, lunged across the armrest and grabbed Nora. She gasped as he dragged her down into the footwell, pressing his body over hers. The first volley of gunfire started a second later. It was deafening. The flat, rapid-fire crack, crack, crack of automatic rifles tearing into the car. The Maybach was armored, the glass rated to stop armor-piercing rounds. But it wasn't a tank. Under sustained fire, it would fail. Sparks showered against the windows. The heavy thud of bullets hitting the reinforced steel doors sounded like hailstones on a tin roof. Nora was pressed against the floor mats, her breathing fast and shallow. She didn't scream. Her eyes were wide, fixed on Leo's face, hovering inches above hers. In the flashing light of the muzzle flares outside, Leo looked different. The polished, composed businessman was gone. This was the monster her father had warned her about. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark and feral. He drew a heavy matte black Glock 19 from the shoulder holster under his suit jacket. "Boss, the glass is spider webbing on the passenger side," Vincent yelled over the noise, returning fire through a specialized port in the driver's window. "Drive through them," Leo roared. "Ram the SUVs in the back, push them out of the way." "Brace," Vincent screamed. The Maybach lurched backward with terrifying speed. The collision was a bone-jarring crunch of metal. The heavy armored chassis of their car crushed the front end of the SUV behind them, shoving it sideways into the concrete barrier of the ramp. More gunfire. A loud crack and a spiderweb pattern erupted on the window right above Leo's head. "Stay down. Do not move," Leo hissed to Nora. His hand gripped her shoulder, fingers digging into her skin, grounding her. Vincent slammed the car into drive tires, spinning wildly on the wet road before catching traction. He threw the heavy vehicle through the gap he had created, scraping metal on metal with a hideous screech. Bullets pinged off the trunk as they sped away into the dark. For 10 minutes nobody spoke. The only sounds were the roar of the engine, the hiss of the rain, and the ragged breathing inside the cabin. Vincent navigated them through a maze of back alleys, evading pursuit, before pulling into the underground garage of one of Leo's secure off-the-books safe houses in the South Loop. When the car finally stopped, the silence was ringing. "Clear," Vincent said, his voice shaking slightly. Leo pushed himself up off Nora. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands moving over her shoulders, her arms checking for blood. "Nora, look at me. Are you hit?" "No." She breathed, her voice remarkably steady, despite the pallor of her face. "No, I'm fine." "Get her inside." Leo barked at Vincent, kicking his door open. They moved quickly into the private elevator and up to the sterile modern apartment. It was sparsely furnished: a couch, a kitchen, a medical kit in the bathroom. Once the deadbolts were thrown, the adrenaline began to drain from Leo's system, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. He walked to the kitchen island, placing his gun on the counter with a heavy clack. It was then he noticed the blood. It was dripping from his left sleeve, pooling on the white marble. In the chaos of the crash, a piece of shrapnel from the door frame had punched through the interior panel and sliced deep across his forearm. He hadn't felt it. Nora saw it at the same time. She stopped in the middle of the living room, her ruined evening gown clinging to her. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's nothing. Just a graze," Leo muttered, grabbing a paper towel and pressing it against the wound. Nora didn't hesitate. She walked into the bathroom and returned a moment later with the heavy trauma kit. She set it on the island next to his gun. "Sit," she ordered. Leo sat on the bar stool. Nora stepped between his legs. The proximity was startling. She had never willingly stood this close to him in 7 years. She took his arm, her touch firm but incredibly gentle. She cut away the blood-soaked fabric of his sleeve with trauma shears. The cut was deep, jagged, and bleeding sluggishly. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with antiseptic. It burned, but Leo didn't flinch. He couldn't feel the pain. He could only feel her hands on his skin. He watched her face. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. For a fleeting second, the wall was gone. She wasn't the captive. He wasn't the captor. They were just a man and a woman in the aftermath of survival. Nora reached for the suture kit. As she prepped the needle, her fingers brushed against the pulse point on his wrist. Her hand was trembling. Just a little. "Nora," Leo whispered. The word carried 7 years of desperation. He reached out with his good hand and gently cupped her cheek. For half a second, she leaned into the touch. Her eyes fluttered closed, a ragged breath escaping her lips. It was the most intimate thing she had ever given him. A crack in the ice, a glimmer of the woman beneath the armor. Leo's heart slammed against his ribs. "She's here," he thought. "She actually cares." Then her eyes snapped open. The wall slammed back down, thicker and higher than before. The green eyes froze over. She pulled her face away from his hand, as if he had burned her. "Keep your arms still," she said, her voice dropping back to that clinical corporate monotone. "You're bleeding on the rug, Leo, and I am not a nurse." She pushed the needle into his skin. Leo stared at her. The brief, blazing flame of hope in his chest snuffed out instantly, leaving behind a cold, suffocating smoke. He realized then, with absolute clarity, that he could bleed to death on this marble floor, and she would simply step over the puddle. He didn't make a sound as she stitched him up. He just let the silence drown him. Morning in the safe house felt like a hangover from a car crash. There were no windows in the main living area, only heavy ventilation grates that hummed a steady droning C-sharp. The artificial lights were harsh, buzzing faintly overhead. Leo sat on the edge of the leather sofa. He hadn't slept. His left arm throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm, the stitches pulling tight against his skin every time he flexed his fingers. He stared at his phone on the glass coffee table. The screen was dark. At 6 a.m., the heavy steel door of the apartment unlocked with a heavy clack. Vincent walked in. He smelled like exhaust fumes, wet wool, and old adrenaline. He locked the door behind him and tossed a set of burner phones onto the counter. "Well?" Leo asked. His voice was raw, scraped hollow by the long night. Vincent didn't look at him immediately. He walked over to the small kitchenette, ran the tap, and drank a glass of water in one long pull. When he finally turned, his face was grim. "It wasn't the Irish," Vincent said. Leo closed his eyes. He already knew. He had known the moment the dump truck pulled out on the off-ramp. The Irish were brawlers. They liked bombs in mailboxes and drive-by shootings with cheap weapons. They didn't have the discipline or the hardware to execute a tactical box-in with armored SUVs. "Who?" Leo asked, though the name was already forming a bitter taste in his mouth. "The shooters we left on the highway were scrubbed clean, but I had Tommy run the VIN on the truck," Vincent said, leaning against the counter. "It was registered to a shell company out of Gary, Indiana. Same shell company Dominic uses to lease his concrete mixers." Silence stretched between them. Leo opened his eyes and looked at his hands. "My uncle." "Yeah," Vincent said heavily. "He's making a move, boss. The union talk at dinner. It was a smoke screen to see if you were distracted. He thinks you've gone soft. He thinks you're bleeding the family dry to keep the peace, and he wants the ports back under his direct control. He knows if he takes the ports, the feds will be crawling all over the shipping lanes within a month. He doesn't care," Vincent replied. "He's 72, Leo. He's looking at his legacy, and he doesn't want it looking like a corporate logistics firm. He wants blood on the ledgers." Leo rubbed his face with his good hand. "Call Carmine. Tell him to pull the guys from the south side warehouses. Put them on the perimeter of this block. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out." "Leo." Nora's voice cut through the room. Leo's head snapped up. She was standing in the hallway that led to the single bedroom. She was wearing a pair of tactical sweatpants and an oversized grey t-shirt Vincent kept in the spare closet. Even wearing baggy generic clothes, she looked regal. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup, her eyes tracking between Leo and Vincent. "How much did you hear?" Leo asked. "Enough," she said, walking slowly into the living room. "Your uncle is trying to kill you. It's business, Nora. I'll handle it." "Business." She repeated the word, dripping with a cold, hollow cynicism. She stopped a few feet away from the coffee table. "Business is hostile takeovers and severance packages. This is a blood feud. If Dominic wants you dead, what happens to my father?" Leo felt a sharp pang in his chest. Of course. That was always her primary concern. Not him. Never him. "Arthur is fine," Leo said, keeping his tone perfectly level. "He's still in Boca. The trust I set up pays for his condo and his security. Dominic doesn't care about your father. Arthur has no money, no territory, and no influence. He's a ghost. Dominic only shoots at things that cast a shadow." Nora studied him. She looked at his pale face, the dark circles under his eyes, and the blood-stained bandage peeking out from under his rolled-up sleeve. "And you cast a very large shadow." "I do. So what is the plan?" she asked, crossing her arms. You don't need to worry about the plan, Leo said, standing up. The room spun for a fraction of a second, a wave of nausea hitting him from the blood loss. He gripped the edge of the sofa to steady himself. Vincent will stay here with you. I have to go make some arrangements. Nora's eyes dropped to his hand, gripping the leather, noting the white knuckles. You are in no condition to orchestrate a war. I don't have the luxury of calling in sick Nora. He walked past her, giving her a wide berth, the physical distance mimicking the emotional chasm between them. He grabbed his shoulder holster from the counter. If Dominic kills you, Nora said quietly, her back to him, the debt transfers back to the family. He will come for my father, and he will come for me. Leo stopped. He didn't turn around. He buckled the leather straps over his chest, the heavy Glock settling against his ribs. I won't let him get to you, Leo said. You can't guarantee that from a body bag. Leo slowly turned. He looked at the woman he had spent 7 years worshipping from a cold, agonizing distance. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to scream that every breath he took was engineered to keep her safe. I can, Leo said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Because before I let Dominic Rossi touch a single hair on your head, I will burn my own empire to the ground and bury him in the ashes. Nora stared at him, her green eyes wide, the mask slipping just a fraction. For the first time in 7 years, she didn't have a corporate icy response ready. Leo didn't wait for one. He walked out the heavy steel door, Vincent following closely behind. The underground parking garage beneath a defunct meatpacking plant in Fulton Market smelled of rust and standing water. It was Leo's central nerve center when things went dark. 6 of his top capos stood around the hood of a black Lincoln Navigator. The atmosphere was thick with tension and the smoke of cheap cigars. Leo stood at the head of the vehicle, a blueprint of Dominic's Oak Brook estate pinned to the hood by 2 heavy flashlights. He's fortified the perimeter, Carmine was saying, a thick-necked man with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Private security contractors, former military. They've got the gates locked down, cameras on the tree line. It's a fortress, boss. Every fortress has a supply line, Leo said, leaning heavily against the car. His arm was a constant blinding fire now, but he ignored it. Dominic relies on the weekly cash drop from the Southside numbers rackets. We intercept the drop car, swap the drivers, and drive right through the front gates. It's a suicide mission, Tommy, a younger lieutenant, muttered, shifting uncomfortably. Even if we get through the gates, there are 30 armed men on the property. I didn't say we... Leo corrected, his voice flat. He looked around the circle of men. These were killers, thieves, and extortionists. But they were his. I am going, Carmine frowned. Boss, you can't go in alone. You're a target. I am the only target, Leo said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of manila folders, tossing them onto the hood of the Lincoln. Dominic wants me. He wants the ports. If he gets me, the war is over. He'll absorb you all back into the fold. You won't lose your territories. The men stared at the folders. What is this? Carmine asked. Those are the routing numbers to the offshore accounts, holding the clean capital from the logistics firm, Leo said. 3 million in each. The money is washed. It's untraceable. You take it, you keep your heads down, and you let Dominic have the bloody crown. You're paying us off, Tommy asked, sounding offended. You think we won't fight for you? I think fighting for me today means you die tomorrow, Leo said brutally. I'm not asking you to die for a family dispute. Take the money. Disappear until the dust settles. Leo looked at Vincent, who had been standing silently near the concrete pillar. Vincent, you have a different job. Vincent stepped forward. Name it. Leo pulled a single thick sealed envelope from his inside pocket. He didn't toss this one. He handed it directly to Vincent. Passports, new social security numbers, flight itineraries for a private charter out of Midway, leaving at 9 p.m. tonight. Leo instructed, his voice dropping slightly. It goes to Geneva. From there, a private car will take her to a chalet in the Swiss Alps. The deed is in the envelope. So is a bank account routing number. There is $40 million in it. Vincent looked at the envelope in his massive hands, then up at Leo. Nora. Yes, boss. Vincent hesitated. You're sending her away. I am giving her exactly what she has always wanted, Leo said, looking away from his friend. The ache in his chest was suddenly much sharper than the wound in his arm. Freedom. My uncle won't hunt her if I'm dead, and she's off the continent. She has no claim to the business. She's a ghost. And you, I'm going to Oak Brook. Vincent clenched his jaw. Let me come with you. No, your job is Nora. You get her on that plane, Vincent. You watch the wheels leave the tarmac. If you fail, I will haunt you. Leo didn't wait for an argument. He turned and walked away into the shadows of the garage, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the damp concrete. It took him an hour to get back to the safe house. When he unlocked the door, the apartment was quiet. Nora was sitting at the small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. She looked up as he entered. Leo walked over and placed the heavy sealed envelope on the table in front of her. What is this? She asked. Your exit, Leo said. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat heavily. He was exhausted. So utterly, fundamentally exhausted. There's a passport in there. Flight details. Money. Enough money that you and your father will never have to think about a price tag for the rest of your lives. Nora didn't touch the envelope. She stared at it as if it were a bomb. I don't understand. Dominic wants a war. I'm not going to give him one. I'm going to end it tonight. But before I do, you are leaving. Her eyes flicked up to his face. You're going to kill him. I'm going to try. And if you fail, then I die. But either way, the debt is paid, Nora. Leo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, unable to keep his posture perfectly straight anymore. 7 years ago, I bought your father's life for a price you never should have had to pay. I knew it was wrong. I knew you hated me for it. Leo, she started, her voice faltering. No, let me finish, he interrupted softly. I thought I could make you love me. I thought if I gave you everything, if I protected you, you would eventually look at me and see a husband, not a warden. I was stupid. I was a selfish, arrogant man. And I am sorry. Nora's breathing hitched. Her hands were flat on the table, trembling. Vincent is going to take you to Midway at 6 o'clock. Leo continued, his voice, devoid of emotion, entirely hollowed out. You get on the plane. You don't look back. You forget Chicago. You forget Dominic. And you forget me. He stood up. He didn't reach out to touch her. He didn't ask for a goodbye. He just turned and walked toward the bathroom to check his bandages. Behind him, Nora sat completely frozen, staring at the envelope that contained the rest of her life. At 5:45 p.m., the tension in the safe house was suffocating. Vincent was standing by the door, his heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder, checking the magazine of his rifle for the 4th time. Nora stood near the kitchen island. She had changed into dark jeans and a black sweater. She held the thick envelope in her hand, her knuckles white. Leo was in the bedroom, strapping on a Kevlar vest. He was leaving for Oak Brook 10 minutes after they left for the airport. Car is running in the lower garage, Vincent said to Nora, his voice tight. We move fast. We don't stop for red lights. Nora didn't answer. She was staring at the closed bedroom door. The silence she had weaponized for 7 years suddenly felt like a physical weight crushing her lungs. He's going to die, she thought. The realization wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It was a terrifying, immediate certainty. He was walking into a fortress alone so that she could fly away. She took a breath to speak, to call out his name, but the words died in her throat. Suddenly the lights in the apartment flickered and died. The heavy hum of the ventilation system ground to a halt, plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Then the heavy steel door of the apartment exploded inward. The concussive blast threw Vincent backward over the sofa. The shockwave hit Nora like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs and sending her crashing to the hardwood floor. Her ears rang with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. Through the smoke and the settling dust of the blown hinges, the harsh beams of tactical flashlights cut through the dark. "Clear the room! Find the boss!" a voice barked. Dominic's men. They had found the safe house. Gunfire erupted. The deafening staccato roar of automatic weapons chewed through the plaster walls, shattering the glass coffee table into a million lethal shards. Nora curled into a ball on the floor, covering her head, terror paralyzing her limbs. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see. A heavy hand grabbed the back of her sweater. "Move!" Leo's voice roared over the gunfire. He hoisted her to her feet, his body positioned entirely between her and the doorway. He fired his Glock blindly into the smoke, the muzzle flashes illuminating his face, hard, desperate, terrifying. Crack, 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 Vincent was up, returning fire from behind the overturned sofa, his heavy rifle tearing chunks out of the doorframe. "Go, boss, get her to the panic room, I'll hold them." "Don't die here, Vincent," Leo yelled. He shoved Nora hard down the short hallway toward the bathroom. The apartment was a slaughterhouse of flying debris. Plaster rained down on them. A bullet whizzed so close to Nora's face, she felt the heat of the displaced air. They reached the bathroom. Leo kicked the door shut behind them, slamming the deadbolt. It would buy them 10 seconds. He ripped down the large mirror over the sink, revealing a heavy steel keypad set into the concrete wall. He punched in a 6-digit code with bloody fingers. A section of the wall hissed and popped open, a reinforced panic room, barely large enough for 2 people designed to withstand a siege. "Get in!" Leo ordered, grabbing her arm and shoving her toward the dark opening. Bang, bang, bang! Heavy rounds began tearing through the bathroom door, splintering the wood. Nora stumbled into the dark, cramped space. She turned, expecting Leo to follow her in. Instead, he stood in the doorway of the panic room, looking back toward the disintegrating bathroom door. He raised his gun, firing 3 precise shots through the splintering wood. A man screamed on the other side. "Leo, come on!" Nora screamed, her voice cracking the panic, finally breaking through the ice. The bathroom door gave way. 2 men in tactical gear shoved through the frame. Leo fired, dropping the first man with a shot to the chest, but the second man was already raising a shotgun. Time slowed down. Nora watched in paralyzed horror as the muzzle flashed. The blast hit Leo on the right side of his chest, just above the Kevlar vest. The impact picked him up and threw him violently backward into the panic room. He crashed onto the steel floor, a heavy, lifeless weight, his gun clattering away into the dark. "Leo!" Nora shrieked. The second gunman stepped toward the open panic room door, racking the pump of his shotgun. Adrenaline, pure and blinding, flooded Nora's system. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She dropped to her knees, grabbed the heavy steel handle of the panic room door, and slammed it shut with every ounce of strength in her body. The locking mechanism engaged with a heavy hydraulic thud, just as the shotgun blasted against the other side, shaking the steel wall but failing to penetrate. Inside it was pitch black. The air was instantly stifling, smelling of copper cordite and dust. Outside, muffled shouting and the dull thud of fists against the steel door echoed, but they sounded miles away. The acoustic dampening of the room sealed them off from the world. Nora was hyperventilating her hands, scraping blindly across the cold floor until they met something warm and wet. "Leo," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. She found his shoulder, then his chest. Her hands came away slick and slick with blood. So much blood. It was pooling around his body, soaking into her jeans. "Leo, please," she begged, patting his face in the dark. His skin was freezing cold. "Please, God, no." A wet, rattling cough broke the silence. "Nora." His voice was a wet, broken whisper, barely audible over the sound of her own ragged breathing. "I'm here." She sobbed her hands, frantically pressing against his chest, trying to find the source of the bleeding, but it was everywhere. "I'm right here. Don't move. You're going to be okay." The envelope." He gasped, every syllable an agonizing effort. "Take it. When they leave, you run." "Stop it," she cried, tears finally inevitably breaking free, spilling down her cheeks in the dark. "Stop talking about the money. Stop telling me to leave." "I promised." Leo choked out his hand blindly, reaching up his bloody fingers, brushing against her cheek. It was the same touch from the kitchen, but this time it was weak failing. "Promised I would keep you safe." Nora grabbed his hand, pressing it fiercely against her face, holding it there as if she could force her own life into his veins. The wall she had built for 7 years, the armor, the coldness, the cynical detachment, shattered into dust. In the pitch black, listening to the man who had bought her life slowly bleed to death on a steel floor, Nora finally understood the terrifying truth she had spent 7 years denying. She didn't want the freedom he was giving her. She just wanted him. The darkness inside the panic room was absolute. It was not a shadow that the eyes could eventually adjust to. It was a heavy, suffocating blindness that pressed against the eyelids like deep water. Nora's knees were bruised against the steel grating of the floor. She was leaning entirely over Leo, the palms of her hands pressed frantically against the right side of his chest. The Kevlar vest had stopped the brunt of the shotgun blast, but a stray pellet or a piece of the door's deadbolt had caught him high, missing the armor and tearing through the flesh just beneath his collarbone. Hot, thick blood welled up continuously, slipping through Nora's fingers like spilled oil. "Leo," she gasped, her voice bouncing harshly off the close, acoustic-dampened walls. "Leo, keep your hands over mine. Press down, please." He didn't move his hands. Instead, his left arm, the one she had stitched just hours ago, moved sluggishly in the dark, his fingers finding her wrist. His grip was shockingly weak. The Iron Man was melting. "Nora," he breathed. His voice was a wet rattle, every syllable dragging through fluid. "Don't speak. Save your energy. Vincent is going to kill them, and then he's going to get the door open. You just have to hold on. Listen to me." His fingers tightened around her wrist, a final, desperate burst of authority. "Behind you. On the wall. Feel for the keypad." Nora kept one hand pressed to his chest, terrified to release the pressure, and blindly reached backward with her other hand. Her fingers brushed against cold, flat steel. She swept her hand upward, her knuckles catching on a small, recessed plastic box. "I feel it," she choked out, fighting the urge to sob. Panic was a wild animal clawing at the inside of her throat. "Type 902. He coughed a violent, full-body spasm that sent fresh hot blood rushing over Nora's palm. He groaned a raw sound of pure agony. 902, the floor hatch. What floor hatch? Drops down into the maintenance tunnels, Leo rasped. His breathing was growing faster, shallower. Follow the red pipes. They lead to the sewer grate on Kinsey Street. Take the envelope. Walk away. Nora froze. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The panic room wasn't just a vault, it was an escape chute, and it was built for one. No, Nora said. Her voice dropped the hysteria, suddenly replaced by a chilling clarity. No, I am not leaving you here. You have to, he whispered. His hand slid from her wrist, moving up to touch her face. His thumb smeared wet blood across her cheekbone. They have thermal lances. They'll cut through the door. It takes 10 minutes. I'm already dead, Nora. Don't die for a ghost. You are not a ghost, she yelled into the blackness, pressing her full body weight down onto his chest. You are my husband. You are not dying on a floor in the dark. The silence that followed was broken only by the ragged wheeze of his lungs. You hated me. Leo whispered the words, carrying the weight of 7 agonizing years. It wasn't an accusation. It was an apology. I built a cage, and I locked you in it. I thought if I gave you the world, you'd forget the bars. I was wrong. Go, Nora. Please. Let my last act. Let it be something good. Tears streamed down Nora's face, mixing with the blood on her skin. The ice wall she had maintained for 2,555 days shattered entirely, dissolving into nothing. She had spent 7 years punishing him for saving her father. She had weaponized her coldness because it was the only control she had left. But in the dark, with his blood covering her hands, she finally stopped lying to herself. She hadn't stayed because of a debt. She had stayed because, despite the violence and the fear, Leo was the only man who had ever looked at her as if she were the sun. She had fallen in love with her captor, and she had hated herself for it. Her silence wasn't just to torture him, it was to protect her own pride. I didn't hate you, Nora sobbed, bending down until her forehead rested against his. She could smell the cordite in his hair, the expensive cologne, the metallic tang of his blood. I hated that I wanted you. I hated that you were a monster, and I wanted to be yours anyway. Leo went perfectly still. His breath hitched in his throat. Suddenly, a blinding, violent hiss erupted from the steel door behind them. A shower of orange sparks sprayed into the tiny room, illuminating the claustrophobic space in brief, strobe-like flashes. A bright, searing line of molten orange began to trace its way down the center of the heavy door. Dominic's men had arrived with the thermal lance. The vault was being breached. The temperature inside the panic room spiked instantly. The air grew thick, biting at the back of Nora's throat, with the acrid stench of vaporized steel and ozone. In the erratic flashing light of the sparks, Nora finally saw Leo's face. It terrified her. His skin was the color of wet ash. His dark eyes were half-closed, glassy, staring up at the ceiling. The pool of blood beneath him was massive, a dark lake spreading toward the edges of the room. Leo, she slapped his cheek gently. Leo, look at me. He blinked his eyes, slowly rolling to find her face. A faint, terrible smile touched the corners of his pale lips. You said it. I did, she cried, gripping his face. I'm yours. I've always been yours. But you have to stay awake. You have to stay with me. The high-pitched scream of the thermal lance was deafening. The line of molten steel had crept halfway down the door. In less than 3 minutes, the heavy plates would fall inward, and whoever was standing on the other side would toss a fragmentation grenade into the cramped space. It was standard protocol. Through the thick steel, barely audible over the hiss of the cutting torch, Nora heard the muffled, distinct pop, pop, pop of a rifle. Suddenly the intercom speaker set into the wall crackled to life. "Boss, boss, it's Vincent. Do you copy?" Nora lunged for the small button on the console, keeping one hand clamped tightly over Leo's chest wound. She slammed her blood-slicked finger onto the talk button. "Vincent, it's Nora. He's dying. He's bleeding out. Nora." Vincent's voice was ragged out of breath. Gunfire echoed loudly through his microphone. "I'm pinned down in the hallway behind the kitchen island. There are 2 men on the door with a lance. I can't get an angle on them without getting cut in half by their cover fire. They're halfway through the door, Vincent. You have to stop them." "I need a distraction," Vincent yelled over the comms. "I need them to turn around." "Nora, is there an override on the inside panel? A manual release?" Nora looked at the heavy steel keypad glowing faintly on the wall. Below the numbers there was a heavy red lever encased in glass. The emergency release. "Yes, I see a lever. If you pull it, the hydraulic locks disengage. The door will drop open instantly." Vincent said, his voice grim. "If you do it, they'll be staring right at you. You have to drop down. Do not stand up. The second that door opens, I'll take their heads off. Do you understand?" "Yes," Nora breathed. "Nora." Leo's hand weakly grabbed her ankle. He had heard the radio. No, use the hatch. Drop down." Nora looked down at him. In the shower of sparks, he looked like a fallen god, broken, bleeding, but still trying to put himself between her and the fire. She let go of his chest. She crawled over the steel grating, feeling around in the dark corner where he had dropped his gun when he was thrown into the room. Her fingers brushed against the warm metal of the Glock 19. She wrapped both hands around the grip, hauling it up. It was incredibly heavy. "Nora, what are you doing?" Leo rasped, panic finally bleeding into his fading voice. Don't, she crawled back to him. She leaned down and kissed him. It was a desperate, bloody collision of lips. The taste of copper and salt filled her mouth. "I let you fight for 7 years," Nora whispered against his lips. "It's my turn." She turned toward the door. The molten line of the thermal lance was only inches from the floor now. The steel was glowing cherry red, radiating a brutal heat that blistered the skin on her forearms. She raised the heavy pistol, aiming it squarely at the center of the door. With her left hand, she reached for the emergency release lever. She shattered the glass casing with the butt of the magazine. "Vincent!" Nora screamed, ignoring the intercom, her voice raw enough to tear through the steel. "Now." She pulled the lever. The hydraulic pressure released with a massive, deafening thoom. The locking bolt snapped back into the frame. The heavy steel door, its structural integrity compromised by the thermal lance, didn't just open, it blew violently outward, collapsing into the ruined bathroom under its own immense weight. Smoke, thick and choking, immediately billowed into the panic room. Through the grey haze, Nora saw 2 men in heavy tactical gear spinning around in shock, the thermal lance dropping to the tiles. Nora didn't hesitate. She didn't flinch. She squeezed the trigger of the Glock, the recoil snapping her wrists back violently. She fired 3 times into the smoke. One of the men grunted a bullet, catching him in the shoulder, spinning him off balance. That fraction of a second was all Vincent needed. From the hallway, Vincent's rifle roared. It was a merciless, sustained burst of fire. The 2 men at the door jerked violently as heavy caliber rounds tore through their armor, throwing them backward against the shattered bathroom sink. It was over in 3 seconds. Nora dropped the gun, gasping for air, as the cool draft of the apartment rushed into the stifling heat of the panic room. "Vincent, get the medkit now." She spun back to Leo. He was staring at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. But as Vincent moved to breach the bathroom, one of the men on the floor, the one Nora had clipped in the shoulder, twitched. His hand, still gripping a compact submachine gun, spasmed against the trigger as his body went into shock. A single erratic burst of gunfire ripped upward. 3 bullets shattered the ceiling tiles. 1 bullet ricocheted off the doorframe. The last bullet found its mark. Nora felt a sudden massive impact punch into her lower back. It didn't feel like a bullet. It felt like a sledgehammer swung with terrifying force. The kinetic energy threw her forward, slamming her hard against the steel grating next to Leo. All the air was violently expelled from her lungs in a hollow gasp. For a second, there was no pain. Just a bizarre, floating numbness. Then Vincent stepped over the threshold, putting a final point-blank round into the twitching man's head. The apartment fell completely, utterly silent. "Clear!" Vincent roared, throwing his rifle on a sling and rushing into the panic room. "Boss, let's get—" Vincent froze. Nora was lying on her side, her face inches from Leo's. She was staring at him, her green eyes wide and unfocused. Her breathing was a shallow, rapid stutter. Beneath her, a new pool of blood was forming entirely distinct from Leo's, spreading rapidly across the steel floor. "Nora," Leo whispered. The numbness shattered, a wave of agony so absolute and blinding that it whited out her vision, ripped through her abdomen. The bullet had entered just above her hip, tumbling erratically through her organs before exiting through her stomach. "No," Leo gasped. The Iron Man, the untouchable boss of Chicago, let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the primal, shredded howl of an animal being torn apart. No, no, no. Ignoring his own catastrophic wound, ignoring the tearing of his flesh and the screaming of his nerves, Leo dragged himself across the grating. He pulled Nora into his lap, his bloody hands desperately clutching at her waist, trying to find the wound, trying to plug the holes. "Vincent!" Leo screamed, tears carving clean lines through the ash and blood on his face. "Vincent, call a chopper. Call Carmine. Get a fucking doctor." Vincent was already on his knees, ripping open the trauma kit, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out hemostatic gauze. He pressed a massive wad of it against Nora's stomach. Nora cried out, a weak, broken sound as the pressure hit the wound. "I got you, I got you," Leo chanted, frantically, rocking her slightly. He buried his face in her hair, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her nose. "Stay with me. The medics are coming. You're going to be fine. You're going to use that envelope, Nora. I'm going to put you on that plane." Nora's head lolled back against his arm. The pain was fading, now replaced by a deep, heavy cold that was seeping into her bones. The edges of her vision were turning grey. She looked up at the ceiling of the panic room. Then she looked at Leo. He was weeping, openly, violently weeping. The mask of the Mafia boss was gone. The cold calculation was gone. He was just a man holding the only thing he had ever truly loved, watching it slip through his fingers. Nora raised her hand. It felt incredibly heavy, as if she were moving it through wet concrete. She placed her palm against his jaw, her thumb brushing away a tear. "Don't cry," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I'm sorry," Leo sobbed, grabbing her hand and pressing it fiercely against his cheek. "I am so sorry, Nora. I never should have brought you into this. I never should have touched you. This is my fault. It's all my fault." "No!" Nora breathed. A terrible bubbling cough racked her chest, bringing a smear of crimson to her lips. Leo wiped it away frantically with his thumb. Vincent was pressing down with both hands on her stomach, his own face pale and slick with sweat. "Boss, there's too much internal bleeding. I can't stop it." "Keep pressing," Leo roared at him, his eyes wild feral. He looked back down at Nora. "You fight it, Nora. Do you hear me? You don't get to leave me now. We just started. We just figured it out, Nora smiled. It was a beautiful, devastatingly genuine smile. It was the smile he had seen across the ballroom 7 years ago, the smile he had traded a fortune and his soul to possess. The cold was pulling her under now. The sounds of the room, Vincent's ragged breathing, Leo's desperate sobbing were sounding hollow, as if they were coming from the end of a long tunnel. "Leo," she whispered. He leaned down, pressing his ear close to her mouth, his body trembling violently. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Just hold on." Nora turned her head, her green eyes locking onto his dark ones. The sea glass had melted. There was no coldness left, no walls, no armor. Only a profound, shattering sorrow. "I love you, Leo," she whispered softly. Leo let out a broken sob, burying his face in her neck. "I love you too. God, I love you so much. Please, Nora. Please don't go." She kept her hand on his cheek, her thumb gently stroking his skin one last time. "I waited 7 years to realize it." Nora breathed the light in her eyes, beginning to dim the life draining out of her with every terrifying second. "And I only get to be your wife for 5 minutes. Leo froze. The words hit him harder than the shotgun blast. They struck the very center of his soul, a fatal, devastating blow from which he knew with absolute certainty he would never recover. 7 years of silence, 7 years of distance, 7 years of waiting for a miracle. He had finally won her heart, only to realize he had run out of time to keep it. "No," Leo whispered, shaking his head. "No, Nora, we have a lifetime. We have—" Nora's hand slipped from his cheek. It fell heavily against the steel floor, the sound a dull final thud in the quiet room. Her eyes stared up at him, fixed, glassy, and completely empty. She was gone. Vincent slowly took his hands off the gauze. He sat back on his heels, his head dropping to his chest. The wail of approaching sirens began to echo faintly from the city streets outside a useless mocking sound in the face of absolute tragedy. Leo didn't scream. He didn't cry out anymore. He just sat in the dark, pooling blood of the panic room, holding the lifeless body of his wife against his chest. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the faint, lingering scent of bergamot and cedar. The boss of the Chicago Underworld had survived the ambush. He had beaten his uncle's trap. He had kept his empire. But as he sat there, rocking her cold body back and forth in the suffocating silence, Leo knew the truth. He had died in that room too. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't with our enemies, but with our own pride, and sometimes, by the time we surrender, it's just too late. Leo waited 7 agonizing years to hear the woman he loved finally say those 3 words, only for the universe to brutally rip her away in the same breath. Did Nora's final sacrifice break your heart as much as it broke Leo's? If this tragic Mafia romance hit you right in the feelings, hit that like button and share this story. Subscribe and drop a comment below. What would you have done in Nora's place?